and you do battlefield executions, or what you will. Or you bring them to a salt pit, what they call these black prisons, which I'm sorry to tell you still exist more than you believe. And you beat the hell out of them, let them die, or bleed to death. And so it's some ugly stuff that we know a lot about, but not everything about it. It wasn't like the targets we were talking about were people that we believed to be Al-Qaeda or guys against us. And often we paid for that information, which is really strange. Most of the early guys that went to Guantanamo, this jail, this prison that, am I right, it still exists, although it's the single biggest black mark we have in that, and the drones and the predator killings are going to make it almost impossible for us to ever come out of this war against terror in some reasonable way, it seems to me, until we figure out some other way of dealing with the problems we have other than trying to snuff everybody or put them in jail. And not that they do it anymore in Gitmo, but the longer they keep Gitmo there, some people have been there for 10, 11 years without any due process. This is America. And anyway, so I don't, there's nothing specific I have to say to you about that. I just don't know. There was certainly, Cheney believed he had the authority, the notion of the unitary president is that the President of the United States has executive power. He doesn't have to deal with the Justice Department. If there's certain bad peoples we identify, he has the power to deal with them. And that's what he was doing. You see that, and that's sort of been Cheney's mantra since he was in the Congress even. And so, but I don't know anything about, it's not like Cheney said, I owed this guy a lot of money from a poker game last night. Although, with the Phoenix program in Vietnam, when we did target assassinations, often we would get names from somebody who did lose in cards to somebody, and we'd go whack him on behalf of them. It was really strange. No, what he did as far as he was concerned, it was all for the good of America.
We partly allowed that when we let them send billions of dollars in cash there. That was money for illegal ops. You don't.
What do you mean, the billions of dollars? You're talking about the oil money?
No, our government sent over. We said it was to bribe the Sunnis and other things like that. They sent over like a couple billion in cash.
No, what happened was there was a lot of money, oil money, when Saddam Hussein, after the war, 1991 war, there was a peace treaty, and Saddam Hussein was under sanctions, and he still had oil to sell, and a certain amount of that oil he could use the money from that to buy food and etc. But of course, it was a lot of it didn't dwindle down. It wasn't dripping down the way it should have, the way we envisioned it. The oil and a lot of it, a lot of money we held, and it was some of the oil money in our treasury. We had billions of dollars of their money, and that's the money you're probably talking about. There was no, you got to remember one thing. 9/11 happened, and in November, about 2 months after 9/11, Congress authorized, get this figure, $11.8 billion for the war on terror. $11.8 billion. What I'm telling you is just there in the books. It took me about 4 years to get OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, to get an accounting and to get an accounting out of the Foreign Aid program in the Senate, Foreign Aid Subcommittee. I finally got a listing, and it would be like Project K, $600 million. I mean, there was just, you didn't have to worry about going to Congress for money. You had it all over the place. You could do anything you want. It was a dream. It was a dream. And oversight has disappeared in America. Here's Cheney, here's Brennan testifying about the CIA and just sort of having fun with him. What can I tell you? No tough questions. Maybe in camera they did better than they did in public. But the guy is, on Tuesdays, he's sitting with the president picking who's going to live and who's going to die. And you'd think maybe they'd ask a few more questions about it. So we've gone a long way. We should do a few more, these four, and then I'm going to let everybody go to their party.
I was actually going to say, we're just going to do the one more question here, Mr. Hurst.
What?
We're just going to do the one more question here.
One more? Well, we got two.
Okay, all right.
But I've given everybody absolute freedom to move. They can go home.
You're free.
I'm not holding anybody against their will. Let's go.
Two more questions.
Go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Mr. Hirsch. I guess my question is a little bit private.
Was I supposed to be at your class too?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
The same thing, yeah. As a reporter, I'm sure you certainly have heard enough sad things. So I'm just wondering, have you ever changed your religious belief
My what?
Religious belief before and after you became a journalist?
You know, I'm not big on psychoanalyzing myself. I'm just not. And so I don't, I have a family. I don't ever write about them or talk about them. And I don't think my personal views are particularly, you know, I mean, I am what I am. And so I think, I'm not offended. It's a reasonable question. If you'd asked me if I changed my belief in heurism or philosophy, I might have a go at it, but not about personal stuff, you know, only because, actually for some very practical reasons, you know, the less people know about who I live with and where I do, the better it is for everybody, for a lot of reasons.
Would you comment on America's increasing use of drones in countries where we are not at war and the killing?
I did. Every strategic study that's ever been done about the use of air power shows that it's counterproductive, beginning with the study that Robert McNamara worked on in 1944-45. After World War II, we did a study of the bombing of the Germans that concluded our massive constant bombing, eradication of Dresden, all the bombing of civilian targets, actually increased. There was capacity to produce weapons increased, and intensity and support for the government increased. Counterproductive. So there's no reason to think otherwise, unless there's something specific you want to know. I don't think the CIA is much. Most of them are run by the Joint Special Operations Command. Although there's a patina that the CIA has some involvement. Most of the actual operations are done by the military on this stuff. And guys now are getting medals for sitting in Nevada. You know, they're getting combat medals for sitting in Nevada, dropping bombs by remote control. It's pretty good. It's pretty cool. Listen, you know, great powers don't like to lose people. So it's a perfect way we can fight a war against these little yellow people. You know, I always say, want to talk about racism in America, I always say that when Bill Clinton finally bombed Yugoslavia in 1999, I'm just going to give you a fact. You can deal with it any way you want. He was the first American president since World War II to bomb white people. So you figure that out. I don't know what that means. Maybe nothing. Yes? Last question.
In investigative journalism, you run into a lot of situations.
What? You have? Speak.
Okay. Can you hear me better?
Go ahead.
In investigative journalism, you run into a lot of situations where you need to use anonymous sources.
Where you do what with sources? It's just muddled.
Anonymous sources.
Oh yeah, of course.
Where do you draw the line on that? I know that that's something you've received criticism for.
Who would get criticism? I criticize myself for anonymous sources. It's terrible.
Yeah.
I'd love to name everybody, but they'd all be put in jail.
Right. So when you're in a situation, like what types of interviews do you use the anonymous sources for? Where do you draw the line?
Well, I'll tell you what they do with the New Yorker, which is an amazing place to work, because literally, I'm not half kidding, that the final person, when you close a piece at the New Yorker, the final person invariably is a grammarian. And we talk a little bit about comma faults and parallelism. Seriously, when's the last time anybody talked about parallelism? Come on, ever? You got to deal with that eventually. You know, you have to have, and anybody who deals with me inside knows that they have to talk independently and separately to a New Yorker fact checker. So the people I deal with are known to my editor and to the New Yorker fact checkers. Or this, you've probably read something about it. If not, go Google New Yorker fact checkers. McPhee, John McPhee, the wonderful writer, wrote a piece about fact checkers, sort of a homage to them, because they're the good ones are really good. They save, you know, they check the mundane things you always miss, but they talk to the people directly. And often it's complicated. Some of the people in big life right now have, right in the face of the American people, have dealt with fact checkers. And there's never been a leak or an abuse. So, yes, they're anonymous, but they're known to editors, and believe me, my editors are really skeptical of anything I say, think, or do, and particularly in speeches. So that, for me, mitigates the issue. I'm doing a book now that the lawyers will get a chance to talk to anybody they want to. And also I've hired independent fact checkers just so I don't make the dumb mistakes we all make, and middle initials and dates and times. We do that anyway. It's inevitable. Mistakes are inevitable. So I feel better about it, but I always am amazed. For example, the New York Times, which I worked there for 9 years, so 8 years, so I know. The New York Times, which every day leads the story with the Chinese are behind all the cyber spying, according to highly informed government officials. I mean, every day they do it. Most of the time, they're actually at the New York Times because the problem they have is they have to cozy up to people. You can't be antagonistic to the National Security Advisor or the president privately. If they want to leak you something, like the New York Times ran the story about how the president picked targets with the good Jesuit, Mr. John Brennan, on Tuesdays. I'm sure he rationalized that one. I don't know how, but he probably did. Some hardline mythology somewhere. Anyway, and so that's leaked to the New York Times, anonymous sources, and because this is before the election, the president is eager to play for that, the independence, the 5% that can make or break the election. And by the way, what a society we are. Here's an election for the presidency, and the target area are the 5% of the 5% of the people, independents, who don't know whether they're really Democrats or Republicans in most cases. Some cases they just are truly independent. I give them their due. But many of them just don't know whether they're Democrats or Republicans. That's because they don't really know what the issues are. And that's who they play to. So he did that, all anonymous. So the whole issue of anonymity is a horrible one. It's difficult. I like to think I'm very virtuous because we fact check it and I actually have sources. But I will tell you that it's also a system of enormous abuse, because you could pretend that the source, the anonymous source you're talking about, is a high-level source. And I know this for a fact at the New York Times, because some reporters would, if they named the person they talked to, which they could have, they'd rather say an anonymous senior official, because the official they talked to was in La La Land. The person that called me a terrorist was Richard Pearl, who's one of the more extreme, and I'd written a piece about how he was using his position as head of a major defense, he was on the head of the Defense Policy Board under Nixon, under Bush and Cheney, which was a very powerful group, because because he's such a powerfully bright guy. He was this man who spent much of his career as being very anti-Saudi and pro-Israel. I wrote was in serious negotiations, using his credentials as an insider, and on this board, this Defense Policy Board, which is you have to get clearances for it, et cetera, to get access to everything, to try and strike a deal for a huge billion-dollar project to build a fence between Yemen and Saudi Arabia with the Saudis. And that's when he called me a terrorist. And I take that as a compliment. He hasn't spoken to me since, by the way, although I must tell you, he's actually very, very smart and quite engaging. So in a way, I miss him, but that's the way it goes. So the answer to your question is, yeah, it's a big issue. Of course not for me, since I've never done anything wrong in my life, like all the people I write about. But for everybody else it is. Goodbye.